Nora's here too, Steve. So my wife is also here.
Oh, wonderful. I appreciate that. Okay, let's start with an introduction. Good morning to everyone. Okay, very good. As I said, we're starting off, and we're going to take up the topic of the history of anti-Semitism, which is, of course, an impossible task to take up in a period that we are assigned to. We're going to try to give an outline of it and try to scratch the surface as much as we can. Now, it is my contention that the rise in anti-Semitism of 67% in the last year, the terrible situation of the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews were systematically murdered, which includes almost 2 million children, would not be possible without the background that we hope to discuss today. One philosopher during the Holocaust said the problem in Germany is that there are too many bicycle riders. When asked why bicycle riders, this philosopher said, why the Jews? Or what we would hear in Hebrew, Mador HaYehudim. In other words, why the Jews, or why the longest hatred? Today, there are approximately 14 million Jews in the world today. It is estimated by many that if not for the 2,000 years or 2,300 years of persecution, there might be 200 million Jews today in the world. And think what a difference that would be. Now, anti-Semitism as a word was first coined in the year 1879 by William Marr, who was a big anti-Semite. And the root word gives us the false impression that this prejudice is directed against all Semitic people, which is not true. It's false. Anti-Semitism is defined as hostility or actions or discrimination against Jews as a religious group or ethnic group, and hence the longest hatred. To fully understand this historical phenomenon, several historians, including James Keynes, have divided this up into certain sections. Now, if you're interested, I'm going to give you a bibliography of books that I've used. Jesus and Judaism, Christian Anti-Judaism, written by Paula Fredrickson and Adele Reinhardt. What I loved was Christian Anti-Semitism, A History of Hate by William Nichols, The Anguish of the Jews by Edward Flannery. And we see that I am shocked at the number of Christian writers who have written on the subject of anti-Semitism. Now, the earliest form of anti-Semitism, which may have set somewhat of a framework, was the ancient anti-Semitism of the empires of Egypt, Greece, and Rome. And this was called not anti-Semitism at the time, but is referred to as anti-Judaism. And this took the form of various decrees. And to show you, it is really a case of the monotheism of the Jews versus the paganism of these societies. And to understand this fully, we see three particular rebellions of the Jews against this insistence on polytheism, and that, of course, being the Hasmonean Revolt of 167 before the Common Era, and we use the Jewish calendar, which is BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, which is Common Era. And of course, the two rebellions against Rome in 70 AD, which resulted in the destruction of the temple, and 65 years after that, a second rebellion led by Bar Kokhba and Rabbi Akiva, in which not only was the Jews scattered, but if you take these two revolts that are 65 years apart, you will find that probably 1.5 million Jews were killed during these two revolts. And of course, this was to have a traumatic effect on what we are going to discuss afterwards. Now, we get into the Christian era. And the Christian era, I'm going to spend some time on, because the Christian era is very important to understand in the framework for the groundwork for anti-Semitism that eventually led to the Holocaust and what we have in the last 150 years. And to understand this completely, we must remember that Jesus and all his followers, and if he lived, that's a separate question, which we're not going to enter into. Jesus and all his followers, his mother, etc., were all Jewish. And they followed Judaism in a strict form of Judaism. Jesus supposedly said the Shema. And I was shocked to find that in William Nichols' book, The History of Christian Antisemitism, he takes the view that we must differentiate between the historical Jesus and the Jesus that is taught in the New Testament. One might be considered fiction, or one might be considered history. Well, we do know that the perspective changes way after Jesus' death. While he was alive, most Jews at that time in the first century Judea did not know that he even existed. They didn't even know anything about him. And the few Jews that did considered and rejected his ministry because they felt it was blasphemous. The idea, of course, in Judaism that we have no middleman. And in Judaism, of course, our prayers are directly to Ad Hashem. We see that a lot of this changes because many of the early Christians were Jewish. And in order to become a Christian, you had to first be converted to Judaism. Now, they were not getting too many hits on this. So we see the advent of who the Christians call St. Paul, who we might call Saul of Tarsus. And he went out and he saw the Jews were not flocking to the Christian movement. And he went into the areas of Rome. And in the areas of Rome, we see that he preached the gospel of Jesus. And by doing that, and by the way, just as a footnote, during the time of Jesus, he was not called Jesus Christ. He was called probably spoke Hebrew.
Steve, just so you know, we can't see your face.
Okay, I don't want to do that. In any case, we see that Paul went around converting people. And to do this, Paul had to make a separation between Judaism and Christianity. And in making this separation, Paul said that people who convert to Christianity would receive all sorts of rewards in the next life. They stressed the next life completely. And in stressing the next life completely, they said that the Jews would not be subject to this next life because they rejected Jesus. Now, Paul in his ministry never referred to Jewish complicity in the crucifixion. So I want to get that straight. What they said was that the Jews, because they didn't accept Jesus, were, of course, going to be not in this brand new religion that was so good. Now, we ought to have a little footnote here and say that, as I said before, the Jews never really accepted Jesus. And for this reason, it made a very bad impression. Now, let's think if you're a salesperson, you're selling something. In this case, we're selling a new religion, Christianity. How does it look if you're trying to sell something and Jesus' own people do not accept this? Well, it doesn't look very good. So therefore, the Jews were guilty of something or other, but it was not known. Now, we see after Paul, about 70 to 120 years after the death of Jesus, the writing of the New Testament. And in the writing of the New Testament, the apostles who wrote the New Testament, namely the books of the New Testament of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I don't know how many of you have read these, and I suggest you can read it over. I know that I and others have found the New Testament to probably be the most anti-Semitic book ever written, because we Jews are blamed for almost everything. Okay, so these people they use the same names as the followers of Jesus, though these people, the apostles who wrote the New Testament, they never met Jesus, only heard about him. And we see in the New Testament, the writer Amy Jill Levine, who was a scholar on the New Testament, and obviously happens to be Jewish, she said that the most damning of all the New Testament works was the book of Matthew, which has in it, when Jesus comes to Jerusalem and he is crucified by Rome, we see the first inklings of the term Christ killer being used, because the Jewish implication in this execution of Jesus, which we'll get into, shows that a chorus of Jews in Matthew said, "His blood be upon us and our children." Now, can you envision 1,000 Jews as Jesus is being crucified saying, "His blood be upon us and our children"? Now, it was never said. But the thing is that it's put into the New Testament, and for this reason, the Jew hatred was started. It was started, and though the myth was started that the Jewish leaders, the head priest in the temple, who was Caiaphas at the time, and the chief priest in the temple, was a great job. You wanted to have this job because it had plenty of fringe benefits. You made a lot of money, and the Romans picked the head priest, and he, of course, had to be Jewish, had to be a Levite, and we see that the head priest, his main job, according to Rome, was to keep the Jews in line. Now, Jesus was trying to reform Judaism. We don't know if he from what I could read, he definitely did not want to start a new religion, nor did he think he was the chosen Messiah. And whenever he spoke about our Father, which we say, Avinu Malkeinu, exactly what it means. The church writers put forth a document that was called substantiationism, which meant that the church was now the leader in spiritual connection, and that the church had replaced the Jews as the chosen people, Asher Bocha Bono Mikol Amim. The laws of Moses, namely the kashrut laws and in addition to the kosher laws, we see the circumcision, no longer had to be followed because of the life, death, and teachings of Jesus. Therefore, all you had to do was accept Jesus, and you didn't have to be circumcised, you didn't have to follow the kosher rules, which was a very good deal. And we see that at this time, the Jew hatred was starting. In the 4th century, the church fathers of Justin and Saint John of Chrysostom started the myth of the Christ killer. And the reason for this was that for a period of time, the Jews were in competition with the church for converting people. Conversion was allowed in Judaism at the time. Of course, it's not allowed today. The idea of seeking converts. Taking converts is one thing, we're not seeking them. Everything gradually has an effect of this concept of the church being anti-Judaism, and it's lasted from the 4th century until 1963, when Pope John the 23rd had his Vatican encyclical saying the Jews are not responsible for the death of Jesus. Now, the 4th century also saw the advent of Emperor Constantine, and what he did was he converted the entire Roman Empire to having Christianity as its official religion. With this happening, the anti-Semitism was pushed up. There were anti-Jewish laws imposed. In 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea met and decreed that the Sabbath would only be celebrated on Sunday, not on Saturday. The Passover holiday was no longer observed, but Easter was instead. And this, the author John Carroll, who was a former Roman Catholic priest, said this is the turning point in church anti-Semitism. Because at this point, the symbol of Christianity changes. It changes from the fish to the cross. And with this, anti-Semitism is now open. The cross signifying the death of Jesus, and reminds everybody of the Jewish implication in this crucifixion. I must say a word here that crucifixion was never a Jewish method of execution. And according to the New Testament, the Sanhedrin met on the 14th day of Nisan, which that year was the Passover Seder, which was probably Jesus' Last Supper. And it would be impossible for the Sanhedrin to meet, since it was outlawed by Jewish law for them to meet. And we see the whole concept of the Jews as satanic, as cursed by God, with the takeover of the Roman Empire by the Christians. We also see the expanded influence of the Christian church. And at this time, in the first 1,000 years of Christianity, there were decrees, edicts, and mostly things of a religious nature that were imposed on the Jews. There were a few instances of mass killing, but for the most part, they were only put down in church doctrine, not actual killings. This changes dramatically in the year 1095, when Pope Urban II issues his decree for a crusade. Now, many movies were made about the Crusaders. They looked very noble, very wonderful, and their quest was to get rid of the Muslim control over the holy sites in Jerusalem. The only problem is a problem of geography. In those days, they didn't have El Al to transfer them to the Middle East, and so they had to go by land. And since there were no Muslims in their way, they had to find the next best thing to execute, and that was, of course, the Jewish communities. And it's at this time when several Jewish communities were sacked and destroyed, most notably in France and in Germany. And Godfrey of Bouillon said the crucifixion must be avenged and the blood of the Jews must be there. So hence, there was a very thriving Jewish community along the Rhine, in, of course, Germany, of all places. And we see that the Jewish community there was wiped out. 30,000 Jews were murdered in 1096 alone. They made the Rhine River turn red with Jewish blood. And this happened in France and Germany all the way across till they got to the so-called Holy Land. And I do dislike that concept. We call it Israel, and Christians refer to it as the Holy Land. We see at this time that after the Crusades and during the Crusades, many things happened. First of all, we see the advent in the Middle Ages of this time of the blood libels. And the blood libels were very, very interesting. The blood libels held that the Jews, in their attempt to make Passover matzah, needed a key ingredient. And that ingredient was the blood of a Christian child before he reached the age of puberty. And he would be caught by the Jews, crucified, drained of blood, and the blood was used in that recipe for matzah. So the next time you have a piece of matzah, remember what the Christians believe it is. Now, the matzah, or unleavened bread, is very similar to the wafer used by Catholics in church. And the wafer for the Christians symbolizes the blood and the body of Christ. And again, when we make matzah, they are viewing this as, again, I don't know if they still do, the desecration of the host. And hence we see the blood libels. The first blood libel occurs in 1144 in England. And the famous case of William of Norwich, a young boy who was lost and found. He was murdered. Blood was scattered. And of course, the Jews were blamed for this. These blood libels spread all over Europe, as was the situation with the desecration of the host. And as a result, the Jews were accused of witchcraft. As a matter of fact, for those of you who have seen some very old, they had spaghetti westerns, they also had spaghetti vampire movies. And in several of these movies, you will notice that when the vampire gets back into his grave. On top of the casket is a Star of David, indicating the vampires were Jews, and hence the term bloodsuckers, vermin, or whatever. And at this time, the Jewish identification marks had to be given. The Jew hats with points on them, the yellow bands with the Star of David. And this all comes at approximately the same time. We see that the Jews were excluded from belonging to guilds. They were excluded from most professions, from owning land, whatever. The only thing the Jews could do was go into money lending, because that was strictly forbidden by the Catholic Church. The charging of usury could not be. And hence the Jews went into this. Now, of course, we never mind borrowing money. It's when we have to return it with interest that we find ourselves in some sort of situation that is not very pleasant. Now, the barons would borrow money from the Jews, and they would write out receipts. I owe so-and-so money. And when they started the first pogroms against the Jews, they would burn their houses down with the ideas of setting these wooden boxes afire, and thereby not owing any debts. There's no proof of the debts that were owed. At this time, we also see the start of the Jewish ghettos, as well as the start of what they call passion plays. Passion plays are plays in which they will come out during Easter, and they show how poor, gentle Jesus is crucified by the evil Jews. And the only passion plays that I have seen is Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, and of course, Jesus Christ Superstar, which if you've seen that, you see the crowds chanting, "Crucify him," and who are those people but the Jews? At the same time, right after the Crusades, comes the Spanish Inquisition. Jews in Spain had enjoyed a few hundred years of prosperity when the Muslims were in control. And we see that as the Christians gained control of Spain under Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand, they started expelling Jews. So if a Jew wanted to stay in Spain, he had to convert, or better still, pretend to convert. They called these people Marranos, which is a terrible term. It means pigs in Spanish. And the better term to be used is converso. Those Jews who pretended to convert, but secretly practiced Judaism, whether in their basements or whatever. And we have a lot of proof of this. As a matter of fact, it's rather interesting because the Jews that were caught were put before the Inquisition courts, very often on the rack, and they confessed to being secretly Jewish. And of course, they were put to death for this, many of whom died on the cross saying the Shema, which they were definitely martyrs in Judaism. We see that as time goes on, the Inquisition was first declared ended and null and void in the 19th century. In the 1850s, the church officially ended the Inquisition. So it was an effect, if not that great, but it was an effect. The leading inquisitor that's famous is Torquemada. And the last Jews were forced to leave Spain, interesting the date, August 3rd of 1492, the very same date that Columbus set sail for the New World, and giving more credence to the theory that Columbus was most probably Jewish. We see as time goes on, the Jews were forced to leave Western Europe. They all went from Germany, France, and Britain and Spain to Poland and Russia, where they were given some sort of good life for a few hundred years until this vicious part of anti-Semitism spread, and the Cossacks in Russia and Poland were guilty of pogroms. The last such pogrom was in 1903 with the pogrom at Kitchener in Russia. And if you want to read about it, a very good poem to read about that is The City of Slaughter by Chaim Bialik, who talks about the lack of Jewish manhood in standing up to this. In any case, we have shown that this is just the groundwork for why Jews are hated, why the longest hatred, why Mador HaYehudim, why the Jews, and this is the background of Christian anti-Semitism. Now, due to time, I have not gone into the Muslim persecution of the Jews, which comes a little bit later, and how the Jews were treated then, nor do I go into the 20th century, but we see that the seeds were planted in Germany as the rest of Europe. And in the Holocaust, we see that the countries that were most religious, either Catholic, Protestant, Russian Orthodox, or whatever, you saw the most anti-Semitism. So even during the Reformation of the 15th century, when Martin Luther broke from the church and originally tried to convert the Jews, when the Jews wouldn't convert, he referred to the Jews as a synagogue of Satan, and he advocated the burning of Jews inside of their synagogues. Okay, we have some time, and we have a few people on. Are there any questions that I could try to answer?
Ted, yeah, it's Jack Bender.
Yes, Jack.
It's not an exact question. Fine, it's not a real question, but when I was in the Army in '61, there was a small island in the river near a town called Chinon, and the rabbi of our post, I guess, all 14 of us, did a Kaddish prayer for the Jews who were murdered on that island during the time of the Black Death. There were about 10 families who were forced to live on this relatively small island, maybe 100 by 50 feet. But they all were killed because, whatever reason, they didn't die at the time of the Black Death, and they were just murdered. It was lost to history, but the rabbi researched it, and we had a really nice ceremony from the United States Army, whose commanding officer at that post happened to be Jewish from Brooklyn, which is another story, but it was really poignant at that point.
That's fantastic, Jack, because the Black Death or the bubonic plague occurs in the 14th century, around 1347 to about 1354. And in that several years, 1/3 of the population of Europe was wiped out by the rats carrying this virus. Now, the Jews did not die from this because of the Jewish ritual of washing the hands with a blessing. And because of that, the Jews, some were affected. Most of the Jews were not affected by the Black Death, as it was called. And the Christians then accused the Jews of poisoning the wells to get to punish the Christians. As usual, yes. This was a major reason why. But I'm glad you brought that up because that's very important. Is there anybody else who has a statement or question you want to make?
Yes, Steve, it's Mark Gilliman. First, I'd like to thank you for this great summary of the history of anti-Semitism. There's a lot of things that you covered that I had no idea or realized, and I very much appreciate that. My second point is, what would you say was the most important point in regard to anti-Semitism, the real stickler that really drove it home?
Okay, the real stickler would be a group that is not accepted. And remember, when early Christianity was spreading, and they were spreading this to the pagans, there was a high degree of illiteracy. I mean, a very high degree, maybe 95% illiterate. The peasants of Europe who accepted Christianity accepted it hook, line, and sinker, along with all the anti-Jewish things in there. And because they had to come up for a reason why the Jews did not accept Jesus. So the crime of the Jews was not really crucifixion. I don't think anybody who was educated really believed that. The crime was non-acceptance. And because of that, in teaching that concept, the Jews had to be made evil. So it wasn't done overnight. It was done in a period of hundreds of years. And the idea that the Jews were responsible for Jesus' death. Picture yourself, you're a peasant in Europe, growing up, you're going to church all the time, and Christianity, in the churches today, they read first from the Old Testament, showing how the Old Testament shows the coming of Jesus. particularly Isaiah 53, which talks about he will be punctured, he will be slayed. And the Christians say that's proof that Isaiah was talking about Jesus. And the Jewish contention is, of course, that's not the case. They're talking about the Jews as the people of God who were would to be going through this period of persecution. Now, I have to say, illiteracy is a key element here, because I could say something in my presentation here, and you could very easily research and say, Steve, you weren't right in what you had to say. But in those days, there was no way to check the research. First of all, the people had no desire to. They believed in one fairy tale after the other. Some people say that the Bible could be started off with once upon a time. And so everything is accepted. We, in our temple, and many times we've discussed this, don't accept a lot of the things that are said in the Old Testament. I remember you, Mark, protesting and said, if I was Abraham and Hashem came to me and said, slay your first son, I would say, yeah, hold your breath. It'll happen any minute. So I remember you were very upset with that at one time, and it's true, because when you're educated and you can read and write, you can check things out. There was no checking this out. They all accepted this. And one generation upon another hated the Jews. And you have to ask the question, how much of this is around today? And we have to say that in 1 year, a 67% rise in anti-Semitic acts has taken place. So obviously, it's still with us. As a matter of fact, Daniel Goldenhagen, who's a writer I didn't mention, who writes a lot about Hitler's willing executioners, and he wrote a book called The Devil That Never Sleeps. In this book, he tells of 4 reasons for anti-Semitism. He said, 1, if you believe that the Jews killed Christ. 2, do you believe the Jews control the economy? 3, do you believe the Jews control the government? And 4, do you believe today that the Jews are more loyal to Israel than their native country? Now, it's interesting because in Poland, and before 1939, there were 3.5 million Jews in Poland. Today, there are a mere 3,000. And 70% of Polish people taken believe all 4, and therefore automatically anti-Semitic. So we see that it's around today. We're still having it. Thank God we haven't seen it as bad as it has been. But the Pittsburgh shooting, the various synagogues that are being attacked now, we can see it's on the rise, and we know the basis for it. I hope I answered your question, Mark.
Yes, you did, and I appreciate that. But I can tell you that, there's always been anti-Semitism. Growing up in the Bronx, I can tell you it was always there. Maybe now it's being counted more or being more identified, but it was always there. And, living through it, I can assure you it's never, people say it's on the rise. It never went down.
Yes, as the book title says, The Devil That Never Sleeps. In other words, it could be on the downside for a couple of years. Maybe right after the Holocaust, it was down a little bit. But certainly, after in today's time, we see a rise. As a matter of fact, the Israelis put Eichmann on trial and made a big show of it only because there was a definite rise in anti-Semitism, and David Ben-Gurion wanted to show the effects of the Holocaust. Now, I see our friend Shelley is here, and Shelley, I talk a lot about this, and Shelley feels that there's a psychological kind of anti-Semitism as well that's brought on by, in America, we've always had polite anti-Semitism. And Mark is telling us perhaps it wasn't so polite. But the polite anti-Semitism is, I don't want you to belong to my golf club. I don't want you living in my area. And though this is anti-Semitic, it's a far trip down the road to saying, I don't want you living in being in my country club, to period, I don't want you living. As it's a short stride from burning books to burning people. Are there any other questions that we have about the presentation or about the basis for anti-Semitism? Obviously, I'm taking the view that the Christian church was largely responsible for it. And this came at a time when Jews, as a small minority, were very scared. Remember, after the Jewish national state was completely destroyed in 135 AD, there was very little fighting spirit of the Jews to fight this back. We didn't have a national state. After 1948, a lot of things happened after the creation of Israel, where we did have a national state, our own homeland, so to speak.
Ted, I wanted to say, you mentioned the Catholic Church. If you go to Notre Dame in Paris, right in the front, there are two statues. One is the Church Triumphant, and then the other is the Church Desolated. And the Triumphant is the Catholic Church, and the other one, this woman, is the synagogue, the representation of the Jews. It's right up front. It's not noticed that much, but if you get a book about Jews in France or Paris, it's right there. They never took it down.
And this is this is the first one, but these appeared all over Europe. That statue of the New Testament versus the Old, Christians versus Jews, where they showed the denigration of the Jew. And you see in that statue the laws of Moses and the Ten Commandments being broken,
right?
Because they're no longer in effect due to the life of Jesus.
It's so really ugly.
The church bears a tremendous responsibility, and that's why in 1963, I remember that very clearly. I was 18 years old and a real tough guy and a wise guy, and I said, and when the Pope said the Jews are no longer responsible, I took a very immature attitude. What's the big deal? And it was a big deal. It was a tremendous big deal. I was wrong as a kid. It was a big deal, because this meant the church was saying, particularly after the church action during the Holocaust of Pope Pius XII, where he knew of things and never made a single statement about it. Any other questions or comments that you'd like to make? Larry, anything you want to say?
Steve?
Larry?
Steve, does anyone ever blame the Romans for the actual crucifixion?
I think some people do. And for those who know anything about history, they would know that the Jewish method of execution was never crucifixion. The Jewish method of execution, when the Jews were in control, was stoning. And of course, the Pharisees and the temple wanted to get rid of Jesus. He may have been a troublemaker, but certainly you cannot blame all Jews for this action for forever and ever, as Matthew suggests. And there are many Christian scholars who disavow this. And that's why Pope John the 23rd, who was a very old pope when he was appointed, did a fantastic thing. He said the Jews are not responsible for this, the Jews then or the Jews now. And yet we had people like Mel Gibson in his Passion of the Christ, who was vehemently anti-Semitic, completely down the line. Are there any other questions, Shelley? Do you have something you want to add?
Very irrational. It's very
of
irrational.
course, but hatred is irrational.
Yeah. To say that all Jews from history, from the beginning of Jesus on, are responsible for the death it's
unbelievable. But again, remember that the 95% of the world then was totally illiterate. They couldn't read and check out things. And this is very, very, very important in the situation. And the church leaders, the church elders, deserve responsibility for this.
Did the Romans take part in?
Well, the Romans, as I mentioned before, the Romans are responsibility for 1.5 million Jewish deaths and the destruction of the Jewish national state. in the rebellion of 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. In 135 AD, after the Bar Kokhba revolt with Bar Kokhba and Rabbi Akiva, we see any place from 700,000 to 1 million Jews being killed, and the Jews are sent into diaspora, where they, of course, without a national state, were subject to this persecution. And I have to say one other thing, that this, in fact, developed a Jewish mentality of suffering, where I gave a lecture to the JCC last year on why the Jews, as a group, from the year 135 till 1943 with the Warsaw Ghetto operation, did not offer any resistance to this. And this was planned to keep the Jews alive. In other words, the holiday of Hanukkah was changed. It became not a military victory, but it became instead a situation where it was a miracle. And I'm sorry?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Kathy. How are you?
Hi, it's Kathy Cass. I apologize. I can't change my name on here. One rabbi stated once that even though stoning is referenced in Torah, there was quite a bit of hesitation to resort to executions of that kind, or executions at all. Is this true? I mean, my understanding is that really this was not desirable, that rabbis didn't really want to execute Jews.
Well, all we can go by is what's in the Torah and the Talmud. And in the Talmud, as my friend Shelley will tell you, Jesus is definitely brought up in the Talmud several times, and the rejection of it. As a matter of fact, the Jews said in certain prayers, and one of the prayers is the Avinu prayer, the Oleno prayer, was said in respect to the Jews that were killed along the Rhine River. But getting back to the Jews actually in the time of Jesus, 98% of the Jewish population of Judea at the time did not even know that Jesus existed. And the governing body of the Jews was the Sanhedrin. Now, as I mentioned to you before, according to the New Testament, the Sanhedrin met on the 14th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, which is impossible. By Jewish law, they could not meet on Passover. So the Jewish implication, or the accusation of, and it's called deicide, the killing of God, could not have taken place. But they had to find some reason why the Jews would not accept Jesus. And they can only find the reason that the Jews are responsible for his killing. Hence the idea of the Christ killers. Mark, are you still with us? I guess not. Well,
But my question...
No, yes, I am. I am here, Steve.
One of the accusations made by, and a lot of Jews have heard this, is the concept of Christ killer. The Jews a few years ago they would meet you and they would say, "You're a Christ killer," and you say, "Me, I never met him." But it's not a joke. It's really very serious, and that's why we have to know something about that. Now, the rabbis of the Sanhedrin, to answer to Kathy's question, was a case where there were certain rabbis who may have been opposed to that. But don't forget, we are not dealing at that time in the period of Rabbinic Judaism. Rabbinic Judaism starts, I would say, after the destruction of the temple, when the holidays had to be observed differently. At the time, we are still in what we call the era of Temple Judaism. So, yeah,
the high priests were picked by the Romans.
Absolutely.
I mean, they were political people. They weren't necessarily purists in regard to religion or whatever. They were stooges. You know?
Well, initially they were picked. They would train religiously, whatever. But you're right. They were picked by the Romans, and as I mentioned before, it was a great job to have. You got paid a huge salary for being the high priest. You had to come into action perhaps one day a year on Yom Kippur to go into the Holy of Holies. But for the most part, the Romans expected that the high priest would control the Jews. That was their job. And obviously, it was a very vast problem because the high priest did not control the Jews. There were many minor rebellions, and of course, the two big ones that I mentioned in 70 AD and 135 AD.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Kathy, I wanted to respond directly to the issue of
Punishment?
the rabbis and carrying out the death penalty.
Yes.
And generally speaking, while we were only sporadically really in control of our own punishments and so on, without a doubt, the rabbis were extremely reluctant to carry out a death penalty.
Exactly my point.
Yeah.
Which is more proof of the fact that all this was New Testament fiction that was written, and it was done for a purpose. And they sort of achieved that purpose on our backs. Are there any other?
Add something, please.
I'm sorry.
I'd like to add something. During Temple Judaism, and while we were wandering through the desert, we offered sacrifices. So once the temple was destroyed, I am curious to know how, from the distance of Babylonia, rabbinical Judaism issued, this is not the right word I want to use, but sentences, or issued, I can't think of the word.
Customs, perhaps. The idea of having
customs. That's not what I'm getting at. Trials. If you have a trial, you have a decision.
Right.
Okay. How legal decisions, Jewish legal decisions, were made, and then how did we get from there to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur services, where you're forgiven by God if you pray hard enough? You're inscribed in the book of life. We all know about this. But crimes committed between human beings must be settled between human beings. So how much of that was settled in the civil courts of the lands in which we lived versus the religious authorities issuing decisions? So how and where did this transition occur? If we're moving away from stoning or death penalty, right? How did we transition away from this?
Okay. Number one, I'm glad you brought that up because it adds something else. And you talk about forgiveness and the whole Kol Nidre service. The Kol Nidre service, which you are asking for forgiveness, Kathy, was used as an anti-Semitic guise, because the idea of saying in the Kol Nidre service for Yom Kippur that I'm asking for forgiveness for anything I may have done, any oaths I took, any things I've done, please forgive me. So the Christians at the time took that to mean, don't make deals with the Jews, because they'll simply go to, if you make a deal with the Jews, they will go to synagogue on Yom Kippur and Kol Nidre, and they'll say the deal is no longer in effect. But the Kol Nidre service, and they judged it that way, and they would send Christian priests and cardinals into the various Jewish services to see if they were conducting the Kol Nidre service, because they misread it completely. That's, as you added to it perfectly, where you said the sins against other people, you have to ask them for forgiveness. You can't be forgiven by Hashem for that. That the sins against Hashem, you can ask for forgiveness for, but not sins against other people. But the Christians turned the whole thing around and said the Jews, don't make deals with them, because they will simply say the deal is reneged because of the Kol Nidre service and the Yom Kippur fasting.
I have a little point. Can I bring up?
So of course.
Sure. When I was in Rome, you go to the ghetto, and there's a beautiful fountain designed by a sculptor named Bernini, who actually was pro-Judaism, you might say. and he designed a water fountain in the shape of a turtle, showing that how the Jews carried their homes on their backs. That was a symbol, and it was beautiful. But the leadership in Rome couldn't stand to have that particular fountain in the ghetto, so they put it outside the ghetto, just as a circle. So if the Jews wanted to get water, the men had to dress as paupers and the women as prostitutes to go 2 feet to get the water from this fountain that was made for them. Because at the time the ghetto was a swamp area, so the water was the only source. So they tortured us in many ways.
Yes, in many ways, and I'm glad you gave that as an example. But of course, the denigration of the Jews because of the church went on. Now, I don't.
I just have
Yes,
one. Again, a direct response to Kathy. So this transition between Temple Judaism and Rabbinic Judaism is complex and reflects a certain kind of genius, because without the temple and all of the prayers and so on really done around sacrifices. So now you go from sacrifices to prayers. That was a genius of a complex genius of a transition. You ask about the Babylonian Talmud. Just remember, there was a parallel Jerusalem Talmud. There were Jews in Jerusalem generating parallel laws, and they traveled back and forth too. But many Jews, up to today, will put their civil disputes in the hands of rabbinic courts. Of course, both parties have to agree. But from that time until today, certainly civil disputes, and then there's also religious marriage disputes that are in the hands of the rabbis, and that existed at the time of the Babylonian Talmud and exists till today.
I might add, Shelley, that without that transition, Judaism never would have survived.
Absolutely.
And now that we're living in America, that's changed a bit more. We've had some very compassionate leaders in our state government who understand that there are all kinds of situations around the need for a technical divorce and have written that into American law. So, for example, if you died in the World Trade Centers and you can't find your loved one, prior to those laws being written, you couldn't remarry and have children. So a very compassionate governor signed into law, that was Mario Cuomo, I believe, signed into law the automatic permission for a spouse to get a get, a woman to get a get. So if someone was missing and you couldn't locate the body, and there wasn't a burial, you wouldn't be a chained woman. So I think in some democracies, there's a much better understanding now of the needs of Jews, and perhaps by sheer numbers, population, maybe politicians saw this as beneficial to do because we have a voting system here, right? But I guess in the Middle Ages, nobody could vote. You know,
there was no voting. But you make a very, very interesting point, Kathy. And this is that in America, when...
So also about Kol Nidre, the prayer is to ask for forgiveness in advance for sins we might commit. And I'm guessing, again, this started with Rabbinic Judaism because maybe there were forced conversions.
That's why it was originally. That's exactly why it started. It started in the 8th century with the conversion by the Christian Vandals, who forced Jews to convert to Christianity. And again, a high degree of illiteracy, et cetera, and they would force Jews to do it. So Yom Kippur was the opportunity for Jews to renounce that conversion. say any vows I made we want to take away. You're absolutely right. Are there any other questions? And I want to thank everyone for participating. If there's any other questions, feel free to ask. I have a lot of books on the subject, so if anybody's interested, I could lend you the books very easily. All I ask is that you return them, but they are available. And any questions you have, you may go to sleep tonight and say, "Why didn't I ask that question?" Please feel free to ask it. You can call me, write to me online or whatever, and I'll be glad to answer those to the best of my ability.
Perhaps, Rabbi, you can send us a list
Thank you,
of the
Steve.
titles of those books you have in mind.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Perhaps you would send us a list of the titles, and then we wouldn't have to borrow the books.
I gave the titles when I started, but I could do that again right now.
I'm sorry, I missed you.
Oh, it's all right. One of my favorites was The Anguish of the Jews by Edward Flannery. The Sword of Constantine by James Carroll. Both of these are former Catholic priests. Dark Side of History, Antisemitism Through the Ages by Jerome Chance.
I'm not writing fast enough.
Okay, I'm speaking too fast. Excuse me.
That's Jerome Chance, C-A-N.
Yes.
C-H.
Chanes. Jesus, Judaism, and Christian Anti-Judaism. And these are a series of readings conducted by Paula Fredrickson and Adele Reinhardt, who are both experts on the New Testament, as well as Amy Jill Levine. And the best of these I found to be William Nicholas, that's Nichols. The title is Christian Antisemitism, A History of Hate. And he is the one who says outright, listen, there's no doubt about it. Historic Jesus is very different from the Jesus of the New Testament. Okay, and as I said, any other questions I could possibly help with, please feel free to call me or write or whatever. I'll be happy to answer you.
What is your email, please?
THEDONKALEL@AOL.com.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay, I want to wish everybody a thank you, and I hope you all have a nice day. And
Thank you.
Shavua Tov.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Feel good, everybody.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. Take care. Be
My
well.
pleasure.
Bye.
Take care. Bye now.
How do we exit?
That's the exit, right?
Where? Okay. Have a good week, everyone. Bye-bye.